Light Waves, the physical exhibition has now been installed in the gallery, in the Spin Gallery. And we take this moment to thank Dean Romer of the School of Arts and Humanities, Associate Dean of the Arts, Michelle Hanlon, Gallery Director Greg Metz, and Gallery Manager Brian Scott for their continued support during this challenging time. And of course, our Events Director, Christy Barris, who's joining us today. Thank you, Christy, for helping us keep everything moving along. And before we proceed with our featured artist, Mona Kasra, I wanted to remind everyone that we will conclude with a question and answer period. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat so we can continue our discussion. I have collected a number of questions that students posted on the discussion board, and we'll be starting with some of those in the question answer. I'm very pleased to introduce Mona Kasra. She's a new media artist, interdisciplinary researcher, and assistant professor of digital media design at the University of Virginia. She received her PhD in art and technology from UT Dallas, and her work involves exploring the confluence of media technologies, art, and culture, reflecting on the impact of emerging media on personal, political, and creative expression, and experimenting with affordances of such media for artistic practices of performance and installation. And currently, she is researching representational, effective, and creative possibilities of immersive media and designing experimental and performative experiences in VR. And some of you saw her piece at the gallery. She exhibits her video installations extensively and has been involved in organizing conferences such as one for SIGGRAPH. And she was also awarded an artist residency at Central Track in Dallas, which was sponsored by UT Dallas. So she's been making a number of contributions everywhere, and including in the Dallas area. So we're really excited to have Mona join us today. And I'm going to make her the presenter, and we'll see how that.
I think you did, right? Or maybe not.
There it goes.
Yes. Oh, perfect. So I can share now. Thank you so much. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Well, it's wonderful to meet all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to Marilyn for the invite to be part of the exhibition, and also for today. I really look forward to our conversation after this short presentation. I looked at the questions and they're just great. So hopefully either I answer some of those maybe during this conversation, or we will, have that conversation afterwards. So I am an intermedia artist. I research around the role of media for creative experimentation and also the impact on society. My work combines perspectives from arts and technology, areas of performance, visual arts, and media studies. And currently at University of Virginia, I teach variety of courses on like new media art, projection design, projection mapping, integrated interactive media, and immersive media, which is like the new area of research for me. And I really enjoy working with students to figure out some of these conventions. In general, I really love to explore and experiment with emerging media technologies within kind of artistic framing and artistic forms, and in a variety of collaborative framings and very improvisational, generally my work is. And I very much focus on exploring the new aesthetic possibilities that emerging media provide for enriching narratives, enhancing the audience experience, and ultimately immersion, especially within live events. My work is very much an inherently interdisciplinary, more and more and very much experimental. I collaborate with dancers, choreographers, theater makers, sound artists, and usually these are larger scale projects that create some sort of live and mediated experience in the process. I thought I'd start by sharing a few of my recent larger scale projects that were collaborative. These are all pre-COVID, which completely changed a lot of our plans, especially any plans that involves bigger, larger audiences and performance halls or, large gatherings. And who knows, I mean, I keep my fingers crossed that we are going to go back to the space where we can make and, share some of these projects. But I guess we're all kind of migrated into the digital space and it's just a new reality. So this is Near Misses, which toured in 2019 and the beginning of 2020, right before COVID pandemic happened, and around East Coast and Midwest in Chicago area. And it was directed by Jennifer Hoyt-Tidwell, who's a fantastic devised theater maker. And the Near Misses was or is an experimental electro pop opera in a form of all-female band for female band members and performers. The show contains original songs, sound collages, as you can see, the video projections and choreography. They were all centered around true near-death stories recorded in Charlottesville community where we live and University of Virginia is. The performers evoked through this music, movement, and media use true accounts of trauma and peril. And throughout the show, these women come together and heal collectively. The projections played a significant role, especially throughout the healing process and when the coming together, the second portion of the piece. It's using the projections, we wanted to convey the personal collective memories, the changes in perspective of these trauma experiencer survivors had to go through, their identities or reconfigured identities through this process, and ultimately that healing through these stories that they're sharing via music and sound and dance. Here, the performers ran the projections. So there is actually like the projector that you see on the right side of the image on the right side. You can see that one of the performers is holding this projector. It's a portable projector, cordless, and they tend to, especially throughout the second portion of the show, they project these internal conflicts onto each other, the memories of each other onto each other, the strengths, their stories. And the videos added another layer to the live events. The projection become like a performer in a sense. And the fact, like it's not controlled by, the operator or me, like it becomes a choreographic tool even in the piece. I'm very interested when like performers actually react or interact with the projection tools or media technologies, or they use it as a very integral part of telling the story. And those moments, those areas are extremely interesting. In narrative, especially based like that, the Near Misses was a devised experimental work. But in narrative-based theatrical productions that I've been a part of, usually the challenge here is around creating a relationship between the live performance and the media space. Projection design is not new anymore in the world of theater, but still, within this very traditional and historic medium, very new. So we have to make sure that the media is actually incorporated in the experience. It's not an afterthought, or it's not something there just to, as a spectator ship, like something that just adds to it. It's just fun. So it's really important that within this physical reality or tangible set that we surround the audience with in a live performance, and this narrative that happens right in front of them, the visuals are used to complicate or enhance this type of immersion that happens and kind of take become another narrative tool. This is She Kills Monster, which, again, one of the projects that was right before COVID that I was a part of. And I used projection mapping here and video design to bring this. This is about a fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. And the idea was that projection would be used to create this fantastical parts. Whenever they go into the fantasy, you just notice that it's kind of energized, like you just go into the seat and these monoliths become, vivid. And the challenge was really to use this as a way to deactivate and activate this illusion of the fantasy in this space. It was really fun project, but super, super challenging. So when we talk about live performance or the liveness of the performance, we usually talk about the live interaction that happens between the audience or the performance, or that live experience that they have in front of each other. This is something that I've been exploring a lot in recent work. In phase 3, this is the Institute for Inner Animation, the collective that my collaborator Peter Busical and myself created, and we worked with a really fantastic group of local artists and many of our students to explore how new technologies expand this notion of liveness in a performance or a performative experience. For this piece to have meaning or to have any impact on the audience or the participants, they had to engage and interact with the environment live. So I show you a few examples of this space. Phase 3 was produced in a black box theater. We have one of these black box theaters that's a really good space in the university. And what we did was we created this interactive, immersive, physical environment that combined live streaming media, responsive visual and musical system, virtual realities, audience interaction, some physical interfaces that you would interact and play with. And all of these modules were interconnected and reactive. So I can show you the actual map of this of the environment. There were 9 main modules that were installed in this space, and each of them had very distinct sculptural, sonic, and visual identity. We use textures that are very much different than the digital interaction we have with the media, or that kind of like very clean, slick, like we use fur. And the idea was to actually get very close and interact with the media. Some modules were live in that they required the participants or the audience to activate and play with them, and they could be very rough with them too, or they could really interact with them in their own way. And some of the interfaces were live in that they were autonomous and they actually seemed alive. They would move, they would react to each other. Basically, every module or the whole, all of these kind of systems were in a constant inner animation and animation together. They were in motion. They would change together, each other. If you touched one, it would have maybe affected another one across the room, which you might even not know. And the outcome was never fixed or predictable. Like everything changed as time went by and how many people were interacting with the piece, including the audio that you heard in the space. One of the pieces, so that the notion of live and mediated being really at play here was very significant in this exploration. We built this over about a month of being, or actually 5 weeks of being in this black box theater, and like we built everything from scratch. So all of these are, different materials, and it's just a great experience and project, and challenging one. So one of these modules, one of the designs consisted of this virtual reality pod, where it's this organic shape that you see in the picture. It's a cone. It was suspended from the ceilings, and participants could adjust the height. So based on how tall you are, you could adjust it, and you would put your head inside of it. And inside, once you're in it, you would see this 360-degree perspective. There was a 360 goggle in there installed that showed a dance performance that was pre-recorded in the same space at a different time. So as you're in the space, physically interacting, watching, and, going into this pod, all of a sudden you were surrounded with a different time of this environment or exhibition or installation. And also the sound you made in the pod would be added to the ambient soundscape of the outside world. So there was this constant, interaction between the live and the mediated. And it was fun because this type of temporal or even visual 360-degree shift that happened when you put the pod on your head, it was kind of new and also jarring for many audiences. Like they would totally, once they were done and they take the pod off and they take their head out of the pod, they were like, whoa, I didn't even know what my direction was. Because everything was in the same kind of relationship. It was just a very different time and there was a dancer that was interacting even with you, or coming close to you and that kind of thing. So this particular piece really blended the physical and virtual together, and this was one of the starting points for me to start really getting to trying to use the immersive media as a visual and artistic tool. In many ways, this particular pod experience, or generally this physical immersive space that we build, mimics a VR experience. Like in VR, the experience doesn't tell, it can't tell you a story from A to Z, or you can't direct the audience eyes, or you can't have a composition or a framing. You're immersed into the whole space, and it's your as a director, as a storyteller, you have to guide them. But then at some point, you just need to really let the audience decide what they want to do with the environment. And that's really interesting to me, and it creates a very quite fascinating space to work with as an artist, where your controls are kind of limited. So let me go to the next slide. There you go. Before I get into the VR immersive pieces, just want to give a shout out to Dead White Zombies Collective and Professor Thomas Riccio. I don't know how many of you know Thomas Riccio at UT Dallas, but one of my biggest influences over the past decade has been working with the DWZ Collective. It has really influenced me, the work that we've done with Thomas, in thinking about post-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, or kind of unconventional performative work. I've been part of the collective since I came to UTD for my doctorate work, and it really allowed me to appreciate immersive and experimental practices, and even hyper-mediated the spaces of art making and storytelling, and which I take into my digital space practice as well. I don't know if you've seen any of the Dead White Zombie, but definitely if they have another event in Dallas, make an attempt to go. It's about immersive theater. And the audience is very active. You give audience members autonomy. Not necessarily it's easy theater, right? Easy performance, because again, it's not giving you everything at the same time, or within a consequential or sequential narrative. You are co-creator of the physical space and the sensory narrative, and you kind of become a performer. In many of the DWZ productions, as an audience, you have to contribute to the process. You are free to roam around, to shape your own narrative. You can exit or enter at any time. You can get close and interact with performance sometimes. And this type of work that I did with Richio, it really gave me the opportunity to experiment with using video projections or projection mappings or generally visual media to create the immersive space that kind of heightens emotional state of the audience or just adds another level of complexity into the scene. I love immersive theater because I think it definitely works well when it gives the audience that sense of direction, of framing, and then allows them to kind of find their own journey. And, you know, as an artist, you have to really give away a little bit of that control, which can be quite difficult for many of us. But at the end of the day, it's the audience who's deciding, you know, what to do. And this is really how I became very interested in immersive media as VR became more and more prominent or much easier to access for tool making or for art making, and the tools became a lot more affordable. I began this type of experimentation with VR 360 space. And I think, you know, VR can offer digital performance stages and spectatorship. It can offer another relationship you would have to a performance, to a stage, or even to a screen, right? Because that kind of framing is gone now. You have the whole image around you. There's no interface. So a few years ago, I started like exploring the storytelling and experiential affordances of VR with my students, and also starting to make work, which brings me to Lost in a Forgotten Place. If you have, I hope you have had a chance to at least get a glimpse of it. It really makes a difference when you try it with the goggle, which is, you know, how the piece is intended to be seen. But I feel fortunate to have this piece being included in a Lightwaves exhibition. And like many of my other projects, I was also super fortunate to work with a very amazing group of artists that, including a sculptor and costume designer who did these fantastic creatures, Annie Temick, and also sound designer Eli Stein. And I'll tell you guys why especially sound becomes such an important and crucial tool when you are telling stories within VR or 360 immersive work. Prior to this work, Annie and I had actually worked together in the Institute for Animation, that immersive physical space that we built. She's a really fantastic sculptor and costume designer. And this project came about when I was experimenting with VR filmmaking, and she was working on like these fun, very interesting, amazing creatures that she was developing. And as soon as I saw one of them in person, and, you know, just kind of the physical presence of these characters and the way they could move in the spaces totally got me. And I wanted immediately, like usually I want to videotape everything that sounds striking to me. But in this case, I really felt like a regular video camera cannot capture the presence of and the size and the movement of these creatures. So it just felt so natural at that moment that I'm like, Annie, we need to make this a 360 film. So it just, the way the creatures are formed or created is so awkward and so interesting and weird that we just kind of started doing it. So we began discussing how we can make this film, we worked with dance artists, Katie Sedlick, Kim Brooks Mata, and Kelly Vandilla, who brought these characters to life. Like the idea was, how can we animate them even? Like there's one thing you have a costume, and there's one thing for having dance and movement artists really bring that character to life. And even thinking about how these characters can interact with each other if they were, for the first time they met each other. So it was just a lot of fun figuring these kind of qualities and movements and all these, just the space, how to tell that story. So we filmed this in a very abandoned kind of forgotten place, really, which is as part of, it was on a land for a robotic auto self-driving car place, which adds to the spookiness of the space as well. But we filmed it there. The idea in a nutshell is that this is a post-apocalyptic vision experience of these strange beings kind of encountering each other for the first time in this kind of empty, deserted block. And then as the piece progresses, the creatures become aware of the audience as well, or in that case, the camera, the 360 camera, and they try to figure it out as well. The story is very open-ended. There is no prescribed way of experiencing or reading the piece, and it's very experiential, which goes to those physical build sets that I was showing you guys about. Generally in 360, the audience, with this piece, I do have to say that just when you experience it with the goggles, the scale of the creature as they pass you by, and with the sound, or when they gaze into your eyes, creates a very interesting reaction in the user, which in a regular video you would not be able to have it. These are some of the, our production at the end of the day, at the end of the film shots. Kind of, you can see how our work environment was. And I mentioned sound because I had the pleasure of working with Eli Stein, who really understands the omnidirectional need that the sound has to have in the VR immersive space. It's not just about the visuals that you need in order for you to feel like you're immersed in the space. If anything, sound is even more important. The quality of the sound. We call it ambiosonic, right? The sound needs to be ambiosonic, just the way that we hear sound in a normal setting in our day-to-day life. In a VR space, you also have to be able to hear all those directions where the sound's coming from. So it was really great to have Eli just make first of all, the sound of creating the sound of these creatures, because they all each have like a sonic quality, and then also mixing the sound and creating that kind of eeriness, spookiness that this piece needed. This is, so when it comes to 360 film, there are two ways of, there are two formats of, filmmaking. One is monoscopic, where you only have one image that basically wraps around you. And then the other one is stereoscopic, which offers two distinct images kind of directed individually to each eye, which leads to having the 3D effect. You can see now depth, which is pretty much how our eyes sees the world. To be able to create a stereoscopic images or format for 360 filmmaking, you have to have the camera that has almost like 6 eyes, which gives you that kind of pair of eyes that we have 2 eyes, we see the depth because of that. So, and that really adds to this piece as well, because again, the way they move in the space, the way the spaces are configured, being able to actually feel the space and not see the image kind of wrapping around you, make a huge difference in this case. But as part of the challenges of it, which I should mention, is also that these file sizes are huge, and you need really fast computers to be able to render them. It takes forever, and it needs a lot of patience to, editing these kind of footage, because you're dealing with 8K, right? Even a 4K is really hard to edit, let alone now you have 2 images basically to deal with. So I learned a lot of patience throughout this process, and I'm still learning it. I'm not getting any better at it. So this is a new piece that we just finished with Matthew Bergner, a musician, composer, and sound artist. And this is Dwelling in the Unfolding, and it's interactive VR piece that we just finished. It's interactive. You actually create sound as you move your head around the piece. And we filmed this all in Alaska. It's about the glaciers and the trains and ice fields and ice sheets. And it really takes you through this really quiet space. And I just realized I misspelled my name there. But the piece allows you to bridge across seemingly disparate spaces and like go up and down to these various parts of the glacier space, and you are choosing which space you want to visit to. So let's leave it at that, and I have my information there. If you guys want to ever contact me, happy to answer any questions about VR or any of these type of projects. But let me stop sharing so that I can actually see you. Thank you so much.
Great. That was fascinating, Mona, to learn a little bit more about stereoscopic VR and why you need a computer that can process 8K files. I think in the class, we've been talking about resolution and I mentioned 4K and then I said 8K, but like, who uses 8K, right? Well, now we know. Now I know someone using 8K.
I know.
Yeah,
it needs
that's
a
pretty
lot of
intense.
patience.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Well,
it was.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I thought I figured out how video editing works until I entered this world of editing, like immersive space. And I'm like, oh, now I know why they talk about all those, reformatting and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, it's always learning something new.
Cool. We've got a number of questions, and some are very specific in response to your project. And some of them had to do with the costumes. You might have seen that. How do one of the questions from Rebecca was the concept for the video and what do the costumes symbolize and what roles do movement and music play? So there were several questions about the costumes, about the creatures.
Yeah, I can definitely, I think I mentioned that Annie Timmick just does these very futuristic sculptures and costumes and hats. Actually, one of her specialties to create hats that you can wear, and like they're really futuristic and weird. And that's actually why we started collaborating in that physical immersive space that we made. There was this wall of faces that we had, various ways of camouflaging the face, like to camouflage your identity. And that's how our collaboration started. And she just has these beautiful way of working with material, and like none of those were actual fabric, none of the material that you saw in the creatures. They're actually kind of papers or textures or material that are not supposed to probably be costumes. And it's an art to create something. Like you can have any of those things as a sculpture and it's still very interesting, but being able to walk around, if you saw the video, like the blue character, which is herself dancing also in it, she dances in that piece with a tail, and so being able to think about the kinetic aspects of it, and it's just really fascinating what she does. So I definitely encourage you to check her website out, and really interesting work. And sound was critical. Like there is no way in general, I think when you work with video or any type of experiential space, that sound just adds so much to it. And especially in the world of immersive media and VR, sound is extremely crucial, because otherwise you won't buy that immersion. You have to be, audio and visually immersed into the piece. So, and one of the reasons that I generally collaborate a lot, and that's so inherent with this type of work that I do, is you can't do everything well, right? The sound artist, especially someone who understands ambisonic or, understand mixing immersive audio together. It's just that's a specialty. And I learned this, over the past few years, especially that you need to, for certain types of work, it's so much, you can create so much bigger projects if you really reach out and have collaborations amongst a group of people around you. So yeah, hopefully that answered the questions. But there are primary colors, and I think they really are they come out of Annie's just imagination and the idea that, you know, we wanted these to be super weird creatures. Like, who are they? Where did they come from? It's just everything about them is unusual. But then each of them has some elements that, you know, one of them like more moves more like a worm, right? Like one of them is like much larger, and so and pointy, for instance. So they all have very different characteristics.
Yeah, I think when we were visiting the gallery, a number of students commented, or some of our exchanges were that they seemed to be aquatic, you know, they seemed to be fish-like. And I think that was kind of like sea anemones and fish scales. There seemed to be something like there. It made everything, even though they're in the landscape, it made them seem like they might have been underwater, which also added to this strange experience of the space.
Yeah, they do have that organic feel like to them, for sure. You're absolutely right. Hi, Gerard.
Hi, good afternoon. Good to see you.
So good to see you.
I got a question in there. I don't want to jump anybody's, place in line. I'm going to have to take off in a minute. I'm probably going to have to jet to another meeting before you can respond to it. But fabulous work. Great to see you. I'm interested, in seeing, more of your work. I'm going to have to log online and see what you have to offer, because this is right up my alley, video, even though I've been away from it for years. See you.
Nice to see you, Gerard.
So great to see you.
Well, cool. Yeah. Well, that question is a nice segue, because we're kind of talking a little bit about process. And we have since you just mentioned video editing, Gerard's question is, so do you rely on a storyboard or a shot sheet, or is your editing process more organic? So what is your kind of process in terms of deciding how to, you're working with a lot of people here, trying to schedule it. So.
Such a good question. And it's something that I tell all my students, have a storyboard. But then I sometimes just show up and I want to do something totally different. So I embrace that as well. With this particular one, we had some ideas, but we had to get into the space and see what fits and what we should do, and how, even with 360 cameras, there is a huge challenge of you don't have that luxury of composition that you can frame things and ignore the rest of the setup or the environment. You have to set the camera, decide on how the movement or how the acting is going to happen, and get out of the space. So run and, just go hide somewhere. And anytime you show up in any of those rooms, we had to figure out, okay, once we set up, where are we going to hide? Or everything needs to get out of it. So it's a very different dynamic. And it took us it was a long day of shoots for us, because we definitely took more than we needed. And then when I got to the editing, I don't think I have a very prescribed process, but I do know that editing is very sacred to me, because that's where I do a lot of going back and forth, and sometimes just revamping the structure of the way I wanted to tell something. So yeah, it really depends on the project, and editing just brings the work to life. You can just add a lot of it. So much meaning can be added into the editing.
I'll see you guys later. I got to go to another meeting.
Wonderful to see you.
Work.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Marilyn. See you later, class.
Oh, Marilyn, I think you're muted.
Thank you. How did you deal with the constraints of lighting? Because you were working outdoors, and then you were working in shade, and then indoors. So the students have had their current project deals with challenges in lighting. And How did you address some of those challenges?
Excellent question, because in 360, that's another thing, it's out of the door because you can't have lighting sets, or you have to find a way to mask it, which is usually is not possible. So it was it was cloudy, so it made the dark, very, very strong shadows gone, which was really helpful. Because the other problem is if you have, if it's a very sunny day, and even we shot some of those, towards the end of the day when it's like beautiful lighting. But if the shadow hits the camera, which you saw the camera structure in the first image that I showed you, if you see, there's a lot of masking that needs to be involved. So at the end, like that's one of the other parts that makes editing very tedious, because anything that you don't want to have in the space, you have to find a way to mask it. And if you're dealing with a stereoscopic, which is two images and like the depth, you can't just mask the way you mask in Photoshop, for instance, because then the audience members' perception of depth can be shifted, and that way you feel like you're not part of the space, and you would see it immediately that there's something wrong with this. So there were some shots where I couldn't use them because of bad lighting, for sure, because you wanted to make sure that there is enough light on them and that kind of thing. But it's a challenge, and you have to improvise a lot when you're on site.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Very challenging, and good comment about working on an overcast day where the light's more diffuse, and sometimes
That
there's
really helped. Yeah.
good. Yeah, interesting. So in terms of just your projects overall, this is a question from Sabine. Do your research interests guide your creativity, or does the creative urge precede the research?
No, research is a big part of my process. I definitely think more and more, especially I move into like the with Institute for Neuroanimation, the interactive immersive space that we built in the Black Box Theater. That was a year of research before we even got into the space to build it, because there's a lot of conversations that needs to happen in what is it that you want to do, because especially with a bigger project that involves people, you don't have the luxury of you can't just say, oh, I don't like this anymore, or it didn't go anywhere. You really want to, even if you fail, it's a knowledgeable, like you did everything about what you're getting into. So research is really, really important. Even if it's, I call it like even sometimes visual research, like really getting a sense of what is the space, especially in a newer space where there is not much research material out there. Like especially in terms of making 360 film now, because like this past year, especially, there's much more information on it, but the conventions are being built as we are making these films. In a few years, we probably have a really great way of communicating in visual storytelling or structure. But right now, it's all about experimentation. So being able to get access to as much as I can in terms of other people's projects. What kind of challenges how did they address some of the challenges? It really helps, at least for me.
What about your interest in this particular setting, which was referencing dystopia? You mentioned your new project seems to on glaciers, has perhaps an indirect connection or direct connection to global warming. But so, did you want to talk a little bit about some of these futuristic visions?
I find it's so hard to not engage with them anymore. Like it was, I don't know, years ago. Perhaps we could just we might not even have really. We could just ignore it. But I feel like it just comes into our mind, our creative process or our thinking. It's not like even I don't do it on purpose. Neither one of these projects came, but these are issues that we are dealing with every day, more and more, and it's hard to ignore them, perhaps, or it's hard to even look at nature now, even in its ultimate like beauty, and it's hard to look at that and not think about the destruction and the fact that we're ruining a lot, or they're not going to be there, and perhaps soon, and maybe we won't be there either. I mean, if those glaciers come down. So I feel like it comes into our practice very naturally nowadays as an artist, because we're responding to the world that's around us.
Cool. That was interesting. We have a few questions that relate to being an artist. These are important questions. One of them was the transition from being a student or pursuing a degree to pursuing your professional activities as an artist.
Yeah, such a loaded question, I guess.
Yeah.
So I did my MFA, and then I was working and teaching, and then I started my PhD, and meanwhile I was still, teaching and making. And I feel like being an artist, teaching, and just being who I am are just so infused together that it's hard to even, there are artists who don't teach, and that's, full-time artists. That's what they do. But with us, there is this kind of, it's not just one identity, it's like all come together, and everything, even the artworks that I feel like a lot of my projects are explorations. They're inquiries and they're research perhaps into like the new tools. So it's definitely, it's just a way of being. That's how I know things. So it's hard to even reflect upon it.
Well, it seems like as you talk about your process, you're constantly challenging yourself to learn new processes and new tools. So kind of like you're always a student of media in a way.
Right.
Like what is the new
so
media?
true.
What are people doing? I know you were really engaged in working with doing research on social media and everyone using memes, and so it seems like that's kind of the way you're approaching your art making is, not just working with a new medium for the sake of doing it, but exploring different possibilities, new technologies that connect to arenas that you want to investigate, like performance, like installation.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah, the affordances of it. Like, what can it do for, especially visual media, which, the social media, especially the visual aspects or the photography aspects of social media and the smartphones, very interesting to me. I mean, all of those are kind of related. And there were times, I think, in the past 10, 15 years where I'm like, what is this that I'm doing? And then they're always, kind of weaved together. And it's a, media changes, and whether we like it or not, it's a different way of making and being and creating. And I'm really interested in that kind of change, that moment of change that takes place.
Cool. What are some strategies to reach a larger audience from your perspective for an artist?
So it really depends. I feel like when you work with performance, if I'm collaborating with choreographers, theater makers, I mean that's pretty large. I mean, depending on which kind of theater or setup you work with, you have a large body of audience. If you work digitally, it should be, I guess, easier, but it's not as easy because there's so much online that being able to find the right thing, or what the right topic, or the interesting, idea that you're interested in, it's much harder. So I find your artist group, or that group of artists that you belong to, or people you work with, the network you have, such a critical part or your practice as an artist, or how you get the word out. Um, I think, especially in this type of media related or film or video, that kind of thing, festivals are a really great place of expanding your audience structure, especially nowadays where, you can find the list of what was shown somewhere online. And, if you go to certain festivals, you can really see what's right now very important. What is it that everybody's talking about? So there are very different ways, but our close network is very important. I think that's where we get nourished, we get our network. It's really fantastic. So the more we nourish our network, the personal network as artists, is the better, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dead White Zombies, and I think that was a group that you kind of connected up with when you were pursuing your graduate degree in.
Yeah, and that was my first introduction to kind of theater. I mean, I came from fine arts, visual, video, and that was the first time thinking about live performance and how media can change that. And then, 10 years after, I'm actually teaching it, and that's what my focus is. So, you never know how those collaborations end up.
Sure.
Really, impacting you.
There are a number of students who are art and technology students in this group, and I was wondering. I know you've been very involved in SIGGRAPH, and I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit about SIGGRAPH.
Absolutely.
I think some students might be familiar, but yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, now especially it's digital. This past year was the virtual conference, but SIGGRAPH is it's the largest gatherings of those who are interested in computer graphics or interactive techniques. And you would find it's a community that I've been involved with and a part of for many, many years. And that led to also an amazing network and group of people that I really respect their work with research, and they always inspire me. So this conference usually happens, around US or sometimes in Canada. And I really encourage, if you're doing arts and technology, you want to, hopefully one day we're going to go back to a convention, or physically we're going to be in person, check it out. There are a variety of different venues for different fields or subfields. So there's art gallery, which includes, arts and technology related works. There's, arts papers, which, are more research oriented, emerging technologies. They're just all the newer technologies that are not even out there. A lot of times you can see there, and just kind of, at the base of their research level, you can see that. And the world of VR there in the past few years has been expanding, and it's a great place. Finding the right conferences to go to, I think, is also one of the really great way of learning, knowing what is happening in the community, or in the discourse, or in the field. So CAA, Isaiah, I think, for those who are interested in arts and technology, is a great resource. And SIGGRAPH. So yeah, keep an eye on all these things that are happening, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point about Isaiah as well. And just from my visiting these different conferences, they often have, if you are interested in interactive artworks or interactive research, they'll have like cutting edge experimental, installation pieces that you can experience firsthand. And it just kind of blows your mind, because that's like the forefront of what's going on, whether it's MIT or Carnegie Mellon or just different institutions. And then Isaiah's international. So you get this incredible mix of perspectives. And I've seen some wild
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Isaiah, it's actually, I really love how, because they're international and they move to a different country every year, you just get a sense of what is happening in the arts and media world in all these different regions of the world. So it's pretty fascinating.
We have Another question from a couple of the students, more about what kind of advice would you give to someone interested in pursuing a career in the creative arts?
Oh, that's a very big question.
It is a big question.
I don't know. I would say just make a work you like to do and keep learning. I mean, just keep learning and expanding. But it's just so hard, and it's such a it changes all the time, even for for all of us who are that we practice. It changes all the time. The reasons you make art, the all those things change so rapidly. So just keep doing, I guess, keep creating. That's the best advice.
Well, that's helpful. I have this is a little more of a practical question from Anne Marie. Does artwork today require a description of intent, or can a new artist show artwork with no description? And I'm assuming here is a reference to artist statement. Please share your personal experience. Do you always include your ideas as an artist to accompany your work?
It depends on the audience. I think that would be, for instance, if you are presenting your idea to some of your academic colleagues or, at conferences where, it's about process, it's about the description of where it's inevitable. You need to do that. And because a lot of the work that I do has a lot of kind of the research process into it, and kind of the process of it is very important, including that is very important. So oftentimes in the past few years, at least at the end of some of those bigger projects, there has been a paper, a short paper even about how this came about, how different. Partly is also because it's interdisciplinary, and finding ways to even talk about process together, and some of the challenges that you had to face with. How did you fix it? Even reflecting on whether it was a failure or not. Like for Institute for Interanimation, we definitely turned it into a paper. We published it. We presented it at Isaiah, and we really evaluated. It was a self-reflective project. This is how we came together. This is why it was challenging, and this is how it was successful in some ways, and it was a failure in some ways, and both of those are okay with these type of interdisciplinary projects. So I like to be able to, expand on or reflect on that process, but it really depends. Like if it's a film, like the 360 film, a lot of times, it's been in festivals this past year, and I don't think people they would watch the synopsis and that's it. They would just watch it, and that's good as long as they experience it the way they want, or they follow the narrative, or however that is. That's fine. I don't need to explain much more. So it really depends on the project.
But on the other hand, sometimes creating these projects requires resources. So writing a proposal for grant funding, one does have to explain and articulate the ideas.
Yes, and that's such a good point, because many of these big projects, I had to get grants for them. I mean, just collaborating with a larger local artist, you want to make sure everybody's paid. You want to make sure you have the technology you need. So many times you have to, articulate what the plan is to get that grant, and then at the end reflect and see where you diverged from the plan of the grant, or where you actually kind of followed it. And most of the time it's both. Like things change, or yeah.
Cool. We've got a big group here online. Has any question? If anyone has a question, I encourage you to place it in the chat. Now's a good time to ask it. If there's any thoughts. So I know what often happens to me. I get a really good question about an hour later. Oh, I should ask that question, but this is
everyone
a good time.
Can definitely reach out. Yeah.
Just looking over, see if there's. So I guess one last small question. This is kind of paraphrasing some of the comments from another student, Anne Marie, and she talked a lot about she had interest in narrative, and so with it seems as though whether it's live performance or whether it's 360 VR, you talked about the role of the viewer. And is that kind of a subtext for some of your pieces where we often think of a linear narrative, that something starts and stops, or it's chronological, or we can see the events we can kind of anticipate that progression. And it seems like you're really engaged in reflecting on our experience of time, or trying to encourage the viewer to think about it.
Right. With this piece, it's really hard to keep the audience gaze and attention. You can't force them to follow anything. So in regular video, that's the frame they need to look at. Whatever's in there, they have to follow that. But here, like, you can have an audience that just looks at, that couch, like that first scene of that video, and like they look at the floor and they miss all the movements that's happening, for instance. And that's part of it. That's okay. So with this piece, one of the goals I had was to see how much I can use the orientation. Sometimes the camera even try to move or rotate it and try to guide the audience where they need to look next. So this is where I feel like VR, the storytelling in that space, has a lot to do with also theater than actually film, because you need to block the blocking that happens. Like when you're watching a stage, when you're watching an actual story happening in front of you, there's so much about how the performers walk, where they come from, where they move. And because of that movement, you as the audience follow them, and the next thing that's going to be in front of you, or the next thing that's important. Sounds, like if you hear something, you would just look there. So you have to really negotiate those possibilities and see what would work and what wouldn't work. And that's one of the things that in this piece I was trying to really experiment with and see how I can create that with even pauses, with that kind of structure. But it's a very interesting, very challenging narrative field because you can't control the person.
Well, that's really cool. Definitely makes me think about the notion of the frame and the space beyond the frame that we know exists in a photograph and in a conventional film. And now that's been exploded with 360 VR. And so we're entering into, very brave new world or something like that. So, cool.
If people are interested, definitely check out some of the documentaries that were especially backed by United Nations, because there are just these amazing stories of refugee camps, variety of different stories that, because there's no kind of what's outside the frame and stuff, you're just there. It really haunts you. Like, you really feel the space. What the subject is talking about. There's no way that you don't feel like the camera person or the filmmaker is manipulating you in a sense, because you're watching things. So Clouds Over Sidra is one of the ones that were the early 360 documentary films that created a lot of buzz in 2015, 2016. And it's on YouTube, so you can check it out. It's a very interesting way of interacting with the media and the topics that are at hand.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think we're all going to check that out. Well, I want to thank all the students for their great questions. I think they're maybe a little quiet today, but a number of them have shared comments and questions before we visited. So,
great.
And Mona, it was just so much fun learning about some of the intricacies of stereoscopic VR that many of us are ignorant of, and so we feel like
until you start doing it, it's like you just learn by doing.
Yeah, it sounds wild and really fascinating, and certainly
Thank you so much.
we've developed a richer appreciation for the complexity that's involved in it and achieving the piece that you shared with us. So
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
yeah.
Thank you for including the piece, and thanks for having me